We're gonna talk about three things. One, we're gonna talk about the Crooked House. Then we have a couple reviews on different books, and if you didn't send me one, but you want to talk about a book, we're gonna obviously have plenty of time. And then we're gonna just talk about the lasting legacy of Agatha Christie. So, now, Crooked House, so let's get into that one right away. So Agatha Christie once said that the writing The Crooked House was pure pleasure, and I feel justified in my belief that it's one of my best. Oh, and I copied it twice. But she truly did believe this was her best work and most creative. She did receive a lot of criticism for it, or particularly the ending. Not that children hadn't, this is spoiler alert, but I've seen you already. Not that children hadn't committed murder before, we just didn't write about it. It wasn't something that was discussed. Just to that point, in the news, the book of the month, Crooked House, said that the shocking ending was one of her greatest. She did shocking endings again later on, but this one was so shocking that the publishers really tried to get her to change it. And she refused. Some compared it to the ending where Murder on the Orient Express. Am I going to blow it if we talk about the ending? Where with Poirot's conclusion at the end, which was very non-Poirot-esque. And there were a couple of others, but this is one that really threw the public off. I think they loved it, but they threw it off. It is actually a movie. I have not watched it. It came out in 2017. Did any of you watch it? Have any of you seen it?
No.
The movie?
Crooked House,
Yeah.
or Orient Express?
No, Crooked House.
No, I have not seen it.
I have not. Peggy or Kathy, have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Look, we're showing you words at the bottom.
I know.
Isn't that interesting?
You can turn that off. Don't remember how, but you can.
I can from here.
Okay, so, and also it was a 4-part radio drama, BBC as well, which I have not found. I don't, assuming we can get it. So let's go to a quiz and see how we did. I will be honest, I did not do brilliantly. I need to share this new screen. Oh, yeah, I need to share this screen.
Okay. That's not working.
We've done it in the past. We did.
I know. What?
Stop your current one. Down bottom.
I hit enough.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. Okay, let's try this now.
All right.
Well, take down the other one. No, don't completely take it.
Okay, we got it. So now, question number 1. How did they meet?
Through work.
Yes. All right. Now, he's slightly disturbed about Aristide's death. What bothers him the most about it?
There were 2 obituaries.
Yeah, I got that one wrong. I was, hey, Kathy, not that I'm that great, but I was really surprised. All right, how many people were living in that house when he was murdered? Anybody want to guess?
8.
You guessed 8. I got an 8. Anything else?
How about 9?
I got a 9. Kathy, you're the tiebreaker.
I think it would, I'd say 8.
All right. The answer is actually 9.
Okay.
All right. How does Charles perceive Brenda, the widow, when he first meets her? What are his thoughts?
You feel sorry for her?
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
everybody is against her, right? They've got her pegged for being the murderer and, or murderess and now, he was filthy rich. Who would have been the least likely to kill him for his money? Out of all of the characters.
Brenda?
All right, we got a Brenda. Anyone else come to mind?
That's not an answer.
Who knows? Maybe it was right. The answer is clemency. She really, how austere, her austerity, how much she just wanted to get out of there. She didn't want possessions, so she was least likely to kill him for the money. Maybe for another reason, but not for the money. Roger was the favorite son. Yes or no? True or false?
True.
True. Yes, he was, which caused Philip to have kind of an inferiority complex, which was a reason for him to be a suspect. Who had the will?
The will to kill him?
No, the actual physical will that was a game changer.
I think it
Do you remember?
was it
It was-
Agritopoulos?
Yeah. He was the friend and was proprietor of the restaurant called Delphios. And the lawyer, however, didn't have it, and he was offended over the whole deal. And the tutor obviously didn't have it as well. What was used to kill him? Aristide.
Esserin.
Estrin.
All right, the ester drops, yep. Now, the big question, who killed him? All together?
Josephine.
Josephine.
Yeah. And finally, she is murdered. Who does that? Who murders Josephine?
Edith.
Edith.
Her aunt. All right, we don't have to submit the answers because I already printed it out, so I was able to guide you along on that one. All right, so let me go ahead and we will,
And minimize that or get out of it. Is that bird box?
no,
So minimize up there. No, yeah. Now you can go back over to, wait, or should I, isn't that you're done?
all right. But we have to get back,
Right.
stop the share and then reshare. All right, so moving on.
Wait a minute, you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Well, let's see if it's,
So now,
the screen's not working. Oops. Okay, they're still seeing the same thing. So I think we're gonna have to do more than this. We're gonna have to get out of it. And this is the problem with trying to do too many things. Now come back over to,
oh my goodness, you've got all kinds of stuff flashing.
shit. And I'm not seeing them.
Okay,
Here's the,
you are viewing,
go ahead and keep talking because
Okay.
they can see you. Well, not sort of, they can see you.
I'm not quite sure what's going on, and I didn't memorize my slides, so I don't know what's on the next one. So let's just talk a little bit about what did you make of the various characters that were in the, and I'll just go through a listing of them. So what was your thoughts about Charles?
Um,
Are you guys seeing that on the screen? Okay, there we go.
So what did you guys think of Charles, the would-be detective narrator? What were your thoughts?
Which one? Crooked House?
I liked it.
Yeah, did you, what
Yeah,
else, what did you
I
like?
thought it was interesting because of his father, and his father was the detective police officer, and they kind of took him under their wing. And sorry.
Yes, his father was going to, do you want to make it full screen?
Okay, this side?
His father kind of took him under his wing and kind of got the perception, perhaps he was an in-training kind of Scotland Yard detective. I don't know whether he was or wasn't. Sophia, what'd you think of her? Thoughts? And what her motives to do that would have been?
I thought Charles was trying to remain objective, which sets up the possibility that Sophia was the killer. But the way Sophia was painted, she was, I suppose, the most neutral in the family.
She might have been resented becoming the caretaker of the slot. I mean, they were nuts. That was my only thought. But I don't think she knew she was going to be the primary heiress of the family estate. So, all right. Now, what about poor old Brenda?
Can I talk about a little bit back?
Sure.
She was adamant that she wouldn't marry Charles until the true person was found out, because she wanted everything to be clear, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, she kind of wanted a specific person to be the murderer. And I didn't quite, I guess it's because you don't want a murderer in your family. So Brenda was the odd one out, right? Would have been the logical
Yeah.
odd one out. Plus the resentments. All right, I think it's pronounced Magna. What'd you think of her?
She was almost kind of like the comic relief, that you had this dramatic person who overshadowed a lot of the others.
Yeah, she kind of drove me nuts. But you're right, it was comic relief. What were your thoughts, Bruce?
She was used for color. She was dipped in and out so quickly, it seemed to me implausible that she would be the killer or an accomplice. But it was she was a good character. Given that they were talking about, their Hollywood.
Right. Now, she certainly was. I didn't know if she was smart enough to have committed the murder or not. That kept going in the back of my mind. Could she have actually done it? But she was so self-focused, I didn't know if she could pull that off or not, or it was her being self-focused and wanting more productions. She certainly wasn't worried about Josephine not getting ballet lessons. That didn't even seem to enter into her mind. What were your thoughts about Edith?
She knew a lot about what was going on everywhere, didn't she?
Yeah. Anyone else? So some of the reading I did said that some people perceived that she had a major crush on Aristide and thought that she would be the second wife. That she came in, they fought like cats and dogs, but there was a fondness, and that she kind of anticipated she might be wife number 2. And obviously that didn't happen. Now let's get into the kids. Roger. What did you think about him?
Is he the one with the very comfortable room, and that he would hang out? He seemed like he appeared outwardly like a nice guy, and as opposed to his wife, who was kind of like the opposite of her, I thought.
Yeah. He had the creature comforts, and she looked like she was in from what I read, like a monastery. It's a very, but what about his role in the family? What might have pegged him as the chief suspect?
Well, he was the one running the businesses that were part of the family money.
Right. Bruce, thoughts?
I thought he was marginally the most competent, and because he was running the business and living well in London, wasn't it?
No, this is the oldest son.
Okay. I can't add any more.
Okay. He was the one that was running his business into the ground, his father's pride and joy businesses into the ground, and hadn't had the nerve to tell his father. And he was the heir apparent, but apparently, he was not the businessman of the family. And was really struggling. He was the favorite, too, of his father's.
And he was ashamed to tell his father that he had run the business down, because he so loved his father.
Right, absolutely. He was embarrassed about his lack of ability. We kind of touched on his wife during the quiz. She was very clinical, very scientific, and actually I think, loved her husband a great deal and wanted to get him out of this really uncomfortable position that he was in, of managing a business that he just wasn't good at. It wasn't his forte. What about Philip, the second son? He was in banking, right? He was not the most competent either. He was running into issues as well, but he really resented his older brother's place in the house and resented the situation that he had put in. And of course, he has the ditzy wife that's running around being dramatic at every corner. And so you kind of have to wonder about his day-to-day life.
Well,
But now we get to Lawrence Brown here.
Did you have something yet?
Oh, Peggy, what did you want to add?
I was just going to say that he didn't seem to me to be like a really great dad. I mean, he didn't really pay much attention to the children, and like he was just doing his business. So he wasn't warm and fuzzy, I don't think. Whereas Roger was kind of more, maybe he wasn't good at the financial part, but he had a good heart, I thought. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we get to Lawrence. He is the tutor. He was a conscientious objector during the war, which automatically put him in kind of a negative light, I think. What's interesting is, and we'll talk about a little bit more about her legacy, And I hadn't thought about this, but a lot of us learned about English culture and society through reading these books. And so we have stereotypes to some extent. So if you are the conscientious objector, you perhaps are a little weak-willed, right? You weren't willing to go into battle. By the way, I'm not sure that that's the right stereotype to have. It's just, he wasn't seen as a strong, heroic character. And it was very obvious that most of the family wasn't that impressed with him. And I think he might have been in love with Brenda, but as it came out, you aren't quite sure what Josephine did with the notes and all of that stuff. Were they? At the end, I'm like, well, so were there really notes passed between Brenda and Lawrence, or did Josephine do that, or what happened? Josephine and Eustace are the kids of Philip and Magda, and to your point, Peggy, the father seemed to have very little to do with them, although I believe that was kind of an Englishy culture thing. Dad did the money, he pats the kids on the head when they come home, when he comes home, and then he goes to his office. Clearly the mother only had eyes for herself, and I don't think she knew. Now, Eustace had, what was it that did he have polio? I honestly cannot remember, but he had an infirmity. Something had happened to him somewhere along the way. And I don't remember what it was. Oh yes, he had polio, but was pretty, and he had it slightly older. So I think he was pretty bitter about his lot in life, not being able to do what all 16-year-old boys were doing. Anyone else want to comment on the two kids? We'll get into Josephine a little bit, since she is our main evil
I think he
doer.
resented that he had to kind of share the tutor with his sister, and felt annoyed that he couldn't do some of the things he wanted because of his sister.
Absolutely. I mean, what 16-year-old wants a 12-year-old sister roaming around, right? Some things never change. Okay, looking at Janet Rowe, thoughts?
She was probably the one that was more involved with the children than anybody else in the house.
Yeah, and that did not benefit her at all.
No.
No, she didn't seem to be, she seemed to be in and out, a little bit mysterious. And I don't know that I ever thought she did it, but I wasn't quite sure where she played in a lot. What about the inspector? He didn't seem to be like the strong Scotland Yard take charge guy. I don't know. He kind of bumbled along and did whatever Charles wanted to do, but Charles was taking his direction from the old man, Sir Arthur Hayway. Anyone else on here you want to talk about? We really didn't, we only got to know other people's opinions of Aristide. We really didn't get to know him.
Yeah. It's interesting, this physical description of him was that he wasn't that attractive a man and small, but everyone's was drawn to him regardless, and he had so much charisma, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, particularly the ladies, apparently. Yeah. They might have been drawn to the bank account. I don't know, hard to tell, but he was not lacking in companionship. Okay, and then the lawyer, who clearly did not have the grasp on everything that was going on because he didn't know about the new will. He didn't trust him with the new will. Which again, that was like a red herring. If you got the solicitor, why was it that the solicitor wasn't in on the new will? So did he have something going on that was, she is the queen, in my opinion, of red herrings, because she led you through this, and I was smart, I'd keep a piece of paper and go, oh, this is why, oh, yeah, this is the one, oh, this is the one. And I probably would have named everybody on this list with the exception of the nanny as being potential doers. I really was enamored with Sir Arthur Hayward, and he had his big stuff in chapter 12. I'll let you read these quotes, and then I'd like to discuss that. What are your thoughts, Kathy?
I like the one that he never met a murderer who wasn't vain, because it takes a certain amount of vanity to think that you can kill somebody and get away with it, I think. And this is all true, although I'm not sure really about the first one, and kill those who love. I'm not sure Josephine always loved her grandfather. So I'm not sure of her relationship entirely with him.
Peggy?
Well, the murderer wants to talk, and we had a bunch of talkers in the mix there. But of course, if they like to talk, then that's good for writing a story, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the second two quotes sort of go together to me. And in other crime stories that are not Agatha Christie, we see those, that idea repeated. So one would assume you could find a basis for it in psychiatry. The first one, you know, if you applied it to today's criminal circumstances, I'm not sure that it's borne out. You know, the types of murders that Agatha Christie chose to, and in the period of England maybe was vogue, are a bit different than what we experience these days. But since crime often has passion involved, one would assume you'd find more passion in a person with whom you have a relationship, whatever it is, than one you don't. That's some of my thoughts.
Oh, right. Well, actually, taking off what you said, you know, we hear about the quote random shootings, drug related and all of that. We hear about all those, but the ones that really make the news are when they're within a family, like a young mother is killed or whatever. Those seem to, for us to keep going on and on and on. I think Hayward had it figured out. I think he knew, and he never went to the crime scene. He got his reports from the inspector and from his son, but I think he had it figured out and was hinting to his son, who's talking to you the most? Who's always popping up, checking in on things? And I got the impression he had it nailed long before anyone else figured it out. The Aunt Edith may have had an inkling. She having lived with this child, she may have seen that not so healthy thing that she had, but, go ahead, Lynn.
Well, Peggy made a comment, I think, about there were lots of people talking. So was this another red herring to as a reader, to look for the people who were doing all the talking?
I think it was well, I took it this way, the kind of talking they were doing. Josephine multiple times came out with things and you're like, why is she saying that? And if she'd been an adult, I think we would have keyed in on it, but she was a child, so children don't murder their grandfathers.
Oh, they.
Apparently they do. Yeah, it was just kind of an interesting, I don't know if you had a chance to read the book, but Peggy, did you think she talked differently than the others did? Like some of her observations might have been different?
Yeah, and she kind of was toying with Charles, I think, giving him saying something, but then not giving, oh, that's nothing, or but I think she was playing with Charles, and she kept saying, so I can't remember whether it was the police are stupid, right? Didn't she say that a lot?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did. It's like, I know something you don't know. And so she was gonna solve it. Well, it was gonna be very easy for her to solve it, because she knew who did it.
Now, are Arthur's quotes here, is that something that Agatha Christie uses throughout her writing?
No, I'm quoting that character.
Right, I understand that. She wrote that, right?
Yeah.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
She uses that theory, look for the person who's doing all the talking.
Well, I think and actually, if we go back to Roger Ackroyd, he was pretty confident nobody would catch him. And yet he let a few things slip as he became more confident or vain. He let more things slip that when she finally revealed the ending, or Poirot revealed, you're like, well, yeah, okay, I got that. That makes sense. It didn't line up, but yes, to some extent she does.
Well, that'll be a good hint the next time we read whatever.
Yeah, I haven't gotten one yet. Okay, so let's get to Josephine. What was your thoughts about Josephine? And why she did what she did?
So how old was Josephine?
12. And so what was her major reason for killing her grandfather? Anybody remember?
It was the ballet lessons.
Yeah. Yeah, he told her she couldn't take ballet lessons because she'd never be good as Aunt Sophie or her sister Sophie or her mother. So it was a waste of money. She was not a beauty queen to be, as she was described in the book. She was not an attractive child.
Right.
But
Yeah.
looking back, was there anything that gave you a hint it was her?
The thing that hit me first, and there's probably a lot more before that, was when she got conked on the head with whatever it was in the shed, and that there was dents that in the ground that showed that it had been practiced, and then that there was dirt around. I was like, I'm thinking she's trying to, set herself up for, no, I definitely couldn't be the murderer. So, and then also with all the note taking that she was doing, I guess, kids could get involved in or obsessed with certain things, but she was hiding behind doors and listening, and, she's kind of creepy little kid.
Yeah, I got that impression. Creepy little kid. But right, that she was defending, that she was trying to set herself up as a victim. Kathy, do you have any thoughts?
I think, didn't at one point Charles's father tell him to keep an eye on Josephine? And at first I thought he did it because he thought she was in danger because she really knew something. But obviously he may have had a clue early on that she was the murderer. So I think Charles didn't necessarily suspect Josephine as much because I thought he was supposed to be there as kind of a protector instead of seeing if, she was the person who had committed the crime.
I think he was trying to protect everybody else from Josephine, not the other way around. What did you think about it? In hindsight, did you see anything?
No, I did not stick with suspecting Josephine. I did think it was interesting and a parallel to another book, another character, where she was feeding information to the investigator and seemed to know an awful lot. I'm thinking of the first book we read, and Caroline, I think.
Yeah, the sister.
Who was the sister of the doctor who did the killing. But no, I didn't have her on my short list.
Yeah, I didn't either. So I did quite a bit of reading about her psyche and whatever, and apparently, and one article literally starts out with a warning. This post to attempts to analyze and reflect upon the work of detective fiction. So you really don't have anything to, deeper to go on. But then in fact, she was some kind of psychopath. Josephine was. The wiring was not, was wired that this didn't bother her. And you said that you don't think she loved the grandfather, Kathy. I thought that was insightful because I don't know if she was capable of loving anyone. That may have been part of the mental illness, was that she couldn't love anyone. She actually, according to one author, killed the nurse because she didn't want the game to end. If they arrested somebody and then the attention wouldn't be on her, and this author goes on to say that they think that she probably would have killed Sophia next. Would have been the next victim.
I think a little terrorist.
But she was, and then she used the cyanide to kill her.
How did she get the cyanide?
Cyanide was around in the day to kill rodents, and it was not known for its, it was known for its killing, but it was not protected as it is today. Cyanide was used in quite a few of Agatha Christie's, poisoning in particular, but I think that goes back to when she was a nurse, not a nurse, she was a pharmacist or a pharmacist tech during World War I, and again during actually part of World War II. And so she had a knowledge of, and I won't say fascination with, but she had a knowledge of poisons. And in many detective stories, poisons are a woman's method for murder. I don't know why.
Now we know.
Be careful, right? So anyhow, I read another article that went really deep into what was wrong with her, and it actually got so deep that I'm like, are you making this up? But at any rate, one thought at the time, people would have thought that Josephine probably had inherited insanity. And that was probably why Sophia didn't want it to be a family member. Because if you were tainted, then would Charles want to marry her? And she wanted to make sure so that if she married him and they had children, this insanity gene, whatever you want to call it, wasn't running through the family. Because at the time, they believed a lot of this was inherited. Which I didn't know. That one took me by surprise. Anything else about Josephine?
Was she kind of a brat in the way she fit into the family?
Well, that's a good question. What do you guys think?
Well, the part of it that they were a little crooked house and they all had their little sections in the crooked house, but the children were, I might be wrong, that they've never been around other children, that they are really isolated. So all they had for their stimulation would be the family members who were kind of odd anyway. So I kind of felt bad for both the kids, even though, and I thought that the tutor was probably a breath of fresh air to enlighten them and, challenge them, but they didn't really seem to like the guy much or respect him. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think he was a strong individual, and they're used to this very domineering grandfather. They got their male role models were a little flaky. I'm not really sure the female role models were all that great either. If you think about the overdramatic mother, and my one question when this all done was, how did Sophia come out so normal?
I wanted to ask Peggy when she said that, I think you were talking about Charles. Were you saying that he was soft and not strong intellectually?
No, not Charles, the tutor.
Lawrence.
Okay. Well, I went into it with an emphasis on the name Crooked House, inferring that darn near everybody in it was bent one way or the other. And so I was sort of putting just a few, which was sort of Charles and Sophie, in the not bent category. But I think I erred in skipping over Josephine. I gave her a break because, she was a child, but.
So did she seem daft?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say.
No,
Very smart. Very smart.
Obviously smart beyond her years and preoccupied with issues beyond her years. But, she was, as it turned out, the most crooked of them. And I suppose the Aristide was not crooked per se, but because there was sympathy toward him. And he had, but he was in fact the head of the household, so he takes blame for what cancer is in it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think he was described as very controlling. Philip apparently lost all his money in a poker game. I just scanned that and saw that he lost his money in a poker game. His father bailed him out, so now he was, so to speak, under his father's thumb and really couldn't go anywhere else to live. But Josephine being a brat, I don't think, to Peggy's point, there weren't other kids to play with. There were very, and again, so one of the things we're going to talk about her legacy, but one of the things in England, particularly between the two world wars, was kind of an inherent distrust of non-native English. So because you had these people coming over after the war, he came from Turkey, that was probably better than Germany, but a lot of times, and that's how Perrault actually, I read somewhere that he used that, someone described him as using being non-English, he overemphasized his Belgian ways. So he stuck out. He used it to his advantage, but that the English had a very straight, those foreigners, and they're horrible. So I'm sure he kept his family close.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's necessarily a healthy way. And not to say that Josephine wouldn't have been a murderer if she had lots of friends. They just would have been on the most, danger list. But
yeah, I would add that on that point that many of her Christie's books use topics that were current then, which are current still: xenophobia, classism, PTSD, the fighter pilot from Paddington
Right.
story. And it's interesting that if they were, 1930, 40 stories. And you just said that xenophobia toward Perrault himself is repeated in almost, every book.
Well, with her background, she probably knew a little bit about, in the case of Josephine, probably knew a little bit about how to portray somebody who was mentally disturbed. Would that be a term you could use for somebody who would go out and kill somebody?
Well, you would hope that,
Yeah, it's hard to know how much homicide there were among teenagers in what, 1920s, 30s, but a case of one would have certainly attracted attention. That Christie shows in other ways that she will research, even if she starts out like pharmacology, knowing a good bit about, that she will do a lot of homework on things like that. And she by nature was drawn to situations that were crooked, I suppose.
yeah, I agree with you. I think you made a really good point. And one of the reasons, and that's kind of the next section, but one of the next reasons is that her books have lasted is we deal with post-traumatic stress now, which obviously World War I and World War II was horrific and people came home not quite right. And we deal with the classes and we deal with all of that today. So even though she was writing about people that you might see down the street, we all know, I mean, you can look at those characters and you can probably come up with somebody that sort of reminds you of one of those characters. And that is still today. I was in church and mentioned to our pastor's wife, and we ended up in the conversation. I said, "Oh yeah, we're having this book club," and she said, "Oh, I love Agatha Christie. I don't think the girl's over 30. I just it is. Oh, I just love her books, and so it's really she writes in such a way." We might just want to skip to that section. Let me see what else I had about the book. But this kind of moves into what her legacy, yeah, thank you, good word. What her legacy is all about. Anything on this slide you guys want to talk about? Like, what did you think about the ending? Was it satisfactory to you?
Well, I think it's the only book that I've read of hers, and I haven't read, all 60 stories.
Really?
No, I haven't. But I was counting on the student that didn't show up. I think it's the only one where the murderer dies with an accomplice or another person. In other words, there was a twofer at the end.
Right. I didn't know. I hadn't thought about that. You're right.
That I would say was a satisfactory innovation. That someone who really cared for the child who did the killing killed the child and herself in order to truncate the story.
Sure.
And provide a good consequence in the opinion of the author.
Peggy, Kathy, what are your thoughts?
I was satisfied with the ending. It, tied up all the questions that, how and why she did this thing. So I was satisfied.
Yeah, and it would have been really hard to think that what would the legal system have done to this child had she come to trial and all that, at that time, who knows? So this is very callous. I'm saying is she put her out of her misery. Sorry, that's very callous, but.
Well, no, I don't disagree with that. I think she was protecting her because she would have gone through the legal system and it would have been, either Josephine would have loved every minute of the attention or she would have been miserable. Or if they had brought an end to it, she would have kept on killing because she obviously got a delight or amused by doing that. So I think the aunt actually did it as a sacrifice to the family. She wanted to save the name, maybe some guilt because she was responsible for the children after her sister died and she was the mother figure. So some guilt about what didn't I do right or whatever. And I don't think they had the psychiatric care that we have available to now. And even now it's not always working, as we hear about in the news all the time. We don't always see that happening. Anything else go ahead.
I was going to say, I think good mysteries leave the reader to try to finish the story with filling in some of the back information that was not given, of the motivation of Edith, for example, what she was thinking, why she did it. But my thought goes back to the Aykroyd story where Poirot gives the revolver to the doctor who killed and lets him commit suicide to avoid being hung. One could assume, therefore, that I think in stories they did, or in truth at that time in England, they did hang for capital murder, and men and women. A 14-year-old might have been a stretch, a 14-year-old female to hang. So this way was a good way to sort of clean that up.
Right. She didn't have to, and she probably would have left us hanging anyway. No pun intended. She would have left us to just imagine what happened when the kid went to jail. She wouldn't have gone that far along. All right. Are we done with Crooked House? Anybody else have any wrap-up comments to make? All right. Favorite book? Bruce.
Well, let me use notes because I've read so many of these now. I have to refer to them so I get the construct correctly. And I will give a spoiler alert that I'm not going to spoil your reading the book, which is a little difficult because there isn't a lot you can say about it without giving away a thing. But the first is, it was published in 1940, and Wikipedia says that it was the first book that showed a price increase from her first published book, which I think was 1927. And for those economists among us, it sold in the United States in 1940 for $2. Which wasn't cheap, actually. There was a TV version in 2003. It was filmed at Dorney Court, west of London in Buckinghamshire. Another first is that it was the first courtroom drama, and not unlike happened with 540 Paddington, where Mrs. Marple solved the problem without much appearing on the scene, and through a surrogate who was in the scene all the time. Poirot, in this case, does this with a doctor, Lord, who actually has a romantic attachment to the prime suspect. One other first, dated the book further. It's the first mention of the use of speedy transport by airplane. One of the givers of evidence was a relative that had to fly back from New Zealand, which would have been many connections. But first mention of air travel. The title I found kind of puzzling. I kept thinking that like someone had been in Cyprus or something other. Well, it just comes from a line from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, which reads, "And in sad Cyprus let me be laid," which in my view really didn't fit with anything per se in the story. Okay, the plot is Eleanor, a very cerebral and attractive young lady, seems from the very beginning the obvious murderer. She is in fact already arrested, arraigned, and waiting on trial when the young doctor, as I mentioned, goes to Poirot and asks him to save Eleanor. She's accused first of killing a young lady, Mary, who is in the household as the daughter of a caretaker, but adopted by the head of household, a woman of great wealth, who took an uncommon interest in Mary, spent money on education, loved to have her near her on the bedside. Mrs. Wellman. And Mrs. Wellman, incidentally, dies before her time. She was ailing and expected to die, but she actually is found to be poisoned. Both poisonings involved derivatives of morphine. And so it's the young Dr. Lord with who is attending Miss Wellman, who's known the family a little bit, but there was in fact a physician older before him who really doesn't come into the story. It's the Dr. Lord that speaks a lot of the evidence, brings up issues. He's not nearly as adept as Poirot points out in missing things. So Poirot is pretty thoroughly through the course of evidence giving and character discovery. Keys in the story: there is no will for Mrs. Wellman. She dies intestate. And so it's a rush to discover, well, you know, where would it go? Oddly enough, as a twist, Mary, the young woman who was killed, does have a will. And in fact, she only wrote it days before when she thought when that intestate she would inherit Mrs. Wellman's money. Not the whole of it, but 2,000 pounds, I think. No, 20,000 pounds was the whole of it. And she was going to get 10%. So she wanted to see where that it would go to a relative of hers. So just days before she's murdered, she writes a will. As I mentioned, 2 deaths, both by morphine poisoning. And there is one character, I can't say who, has a hidden past, which is not surprising. And last, just for seasoning, botany comes to play in a very important clue. And if you push me, I'll tell you what the botany is, but I can't say more.
All right, so I've got the book downstairs. My version costs 95 cents. Apparently I got a whole bunch of used paperbacks for 95 cents. Each. But if anybody else wants to know what botany has to do, we'll go for it. Because I'll probably forget before I read the book anyway.
So botany meaning a plant?
A plant. Someone mentions that they were pricked by a thorn of a rose bush that was on the caretaker's cottage.
Huh.
And the actual rose bush, observed by Poirot and others, was a pink rose. And it turns out that rose bush does not have thorns.
Ooh.
So one gets pricked by a rose bush that has no thorns. It's the clue.
A mystery, yes.
It's a mystery, yeah.
I didn't know there were rose bushes without thorns. Well, now you do.
Yeah, read the book and you can have a scientific name for it.
All right. That's the kind of rose bush I want to plant. All right, anybody else have one that they want to talk about? Okay. Peggy, go for it. You're on mute.
Blah, blah, blah. I don't have much to say, except I believe that this was a movie, like 10 Little Indians. So I know I've watched that before, but I'm showing that to you because this particular story is going to be a play at Oxford Community Center from April 21st to May 1st. So if you like Agatha Christie, that'll be kind of fun to see it on stage. But oh yeah, field trip. But I remember watching the 10 Little Indians, and I was much younger, and I just thought it was scary. It's like because it had to do with the poem. There were 10 little Indians and blah blah, and then there were 9 and stuff like that. So I was like, as a young person, I was like, oh, this is not good. So, but I just wanted to let you know if anybody was interested that it will be at Oxford Community Center, and I'm trying to see what the cost is. I'm guessing probably 20-ish, but
Yeah, I think it is. After you sent that to me, I looked it up. I think it was like 23 a person or something like that.
right. And then there's Thrifty Thursday. The is you get 2 for 1 or something like that. So something to go online to Oxford Community Center, I think, or no, Tread Avon Players is the group that's doing it. But that's what I wanted to add. So thank you.
That's a good book, and it's been used in other the themes where there's a group of people like the Clue, the play Clue, where people kept disappearing, or the movie Clue. It's been this theme that she came up with. But anybody notice the time she uses nursery rhymes, she used Shakespeare, she uses a quote from something else and then spins a story. The Crooked House was based on a nursery rhyme, kind of an interesting set of twists. So I read N or M. It's a Tommy and Tuppence mysteries. There are only, I think, 4 of those. And the book describes Tommy and Tuppence as being middle-aged. They're at least in their 40s. I gagged. But at any rate, they were in their 40s. They're twins and grown up. This is the only book series where you see them actually age. I guess Poirot you do in Curtains because he's an old man then, but they chronologically grow. They were actually influential or worked for the British intelligence during the First World War. We're now at World War II, and they're dying to get back into the game, but they're being told that they're too old. So that's how it starts. She's knitting hats, and he's trying to find work. Tommy is brought into, visited by Mr. Grant, who's with British intelligence, and has a proposition to him that's a way that he can help. There's a thing called the 5th column, which it turns out is real. And it was a spy ring within the British intelligence community of Germans, of Nazis. And so Tuppence very cleverly is able to get herself into the story as well. She gets to go on this adventure with him, but not with him. I'll just leave it that way. They are together but apart. And they visit a small town where a British intelligence officer was killed. And his last words were, N for M, Song Susie. And so the question is, are N and M, N is believed to be a man, and M is believed to be a woman. And so who are they, and can Tommy and Tuppence find them before there is an attack onto the British coastline? Has a group of characters. Of course, you've got folks that are not English by birth. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But you do have this element, again, of people who are not from England in the story. You've got a child is involved and plays kind of a key role that you don't see coming. And it's a very interesting, I really enjoyed it. I thought it started a little slow, but when I got into it, I really enjoyed it. And I thought it was quite a bit different than some of her other books. So maybe somebody will be interested in Tommy and Tuppence mysteries as a couple. So that's my short summary of that one in hopes of enticing you to read it.
Can I ask a question?
You certainly can,
Or may I?
whichever you prefer.
So Tommy and Tuppence were quite a deviation from Marple and Poirot. Did you feel, it seems you didn't, that the structure of the mystery was very different from the others that Christie had written before?
I didn't think that it was necessarily like super different. So can I answer that question by going to my next slide?
Sure.
Let's talk about the genre or how she wrote. And I keep losing my, there we go. We'll go this way and away we go. So why do you think her books are popular? What do you think is so interesting about them? Why have they lasted?
Well, mystery as a category is very popular.
Okay.
And word of mouth works really well to get people to read. She is, a lot of readers of mysteries are female. Was the first notable and still is a very notable female mystery writer. And as we've said, she created a couple of inventions in the stories she wrote. So those would be the things that I would point to.
What do you mean when you say inventions?
The way the plot unfolds. I mean, we've already mentioned it. She was allegedly the inventor of bring the whole cast of characters together at the end in the same room and then pick apart the plot to disclose who really did it.
And has that carried on in mysteries
Oh,
since?
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yes. I can't remember, someone mentioned an example that was.
Death in Paradise.
It was excellent. No, I mean, an example
Of a non.
of a non-Agatha Christie.
Oh, Sherlock Holmes, he raced all over and then found his murderer and brought him in. He didn't pull,
Right.
he went to all of them, whereas
Right.
Christie has everybody come together.
Right. I'm not sure of this, but I want to say that even Perry Mason disclosure in court trials would often have, some of the people in the audience, and it turns out not the suspect who's sitting in the dock, but someone who's in the audience. Yeah, I mean, it's.
He'd get to his closing and he'd go, and of course, Mr. Jones, and you come over and they go, well, of course, and then it could have been Lynn, and then it's, is it the person there, or is it somebody who stands up and screams, I did it? So, yeah, you're right, that technique was used there. Kathy, what were you thinking?
just think that some of her characters you can relate to, so that, you know, they sort of, as you mentioned, they become timeless, you know, that you can, there was the xenophobia that you talked about then, and it still continues. And I just think because of the way she writes it, you know that you're going to have all the clues there, but it's, can you put them together the way she did?
Yeah, I hate authors who come up with some clue that they found out about it behind a closed door and they didn't tell you what it is. It's like, well, that's not fair. If you're gonna know stuff and you're not gonna let the rest of us in on the secret, that doesn't seem fair. So I did a little bit of research, and here's from Run Source, that most of her characters are intriguing and lively. Periodically, we get a parlor maid who wanders through, but that is English life, so it would have been weird if you didn't have people. Rarely the butler did it, right? It's normally somebody that's been built up. Certainly, it's daily life of her time, and she does a great job of describing where you are. Now, probably because I've seen so many of the TV shows, I probably am prejudiced about what I think I'm looking at because I saw Miss Marple or whatever. She's noted, as you pointed out, for establishing this modern mystery framework. Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle were basically the only ones prior to her. Ellery Queen, it comes up as being almost a peer of hers who did some kind of interesting thing, but he pulls a lot from what she did, the way he does his mysteries. But the gist is she didn't have any ground rules to follow, so she just made them up. And that's, I think, where we find her uniqueness. We talked about gather the characters and pull them in to connect them to crime. But it's several articles all went to, here's the deal. She creates a puzzle. And as you said, Kathy, you have all the pieces. You may not know you have them all, but you have all the pieces. And it's yours to lay them out to get to the end of the story. And very similar to the game of Clue. You can ask the questions, you have all the pieces together, so can you solve it? And that is what has actually kept her around for so long, is people still delight in, can I solve the puzzle that she has laid out for us. And then the other thing, we touched on it briefly, here's another source about why she's so popular, is not only they were the first murder series ever written, but they had compelling detectives, colorful suspect, and because they created true rules of a mystery, a murder mystery. Everything was, for the most part, smart and well executed. I did read some people who don't like some of her books, and they gave reasons why, but that's okay. But she knew what it was to write a good mystery, and because of that, she's still so popular and copied. The article didn't say that, but I will say she is in fact copied by many others. With her framework is copied. If you want, we can go look at what others think of her in the genre if we want to take the time, and Lynn's going to need help from BritBox. But you know what? Can we do this? Because we have such technology issues, let me go through the rest of the slides. We'll get rid of the slides, and then we'll do the BritBox at the end. There was just a couple of different elements I thought you might be interested in. By the way, this is another interesting thing is, and I didn't know this until I did the research, the New York Times actually ran an obituary for Hercule Poirot in 1975 when he dies in Curtains. And it was the first time a fictional character had an obituary in such an elite kind of magazine. And so it went on and talked about how he appeared first in the mysterious affair at Styles, and then he goes back to the Styles as well for his ending, his final mystery and ultimate death.
Have you ever seen that before on some other character in a book? That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it was. And Curtains was put out the year before she died. She did not want it to be published. I think she really wanted it published after her death, but her daughter convinced her it was time to go ahead and allow that to be published. So they pulled it out, cleaned it up, but it was very short, it was at the end of her writing career before she had that done. So the other impact I saw, how has the way she's written impacted your opinion of British life? And when you read the books perhaps years ago, did that help you form what you thought it meant to be British and live in England? I do remember the first time we spent any time in English countryside. I wanted to see the thatched roof that Miss Marple lived in and the roses climbing up the walls and the ivy. I mean, I got to London, it was like, ugh, this is a city. This is not what I thought it was going to be. We went out to the country town a little.
Oh, that's good.
I am part Welsh, part Scottish, part Dutch. I traveled a lot to all of the UK before I actually started reading a lot of Agatha Christie. So I had an opinion, and it was considerably more blue collar, I'll say.
Okay.
I think, although I did stay in manor houses, but I saw both ends. The last thing I would say is that the way she painted some of the educated movers and shakers was not altogether favorable. So if you actually took that to heart, it ran counter to, the autobiography of Churchill or, a lot of other things you could have read. But since they're murder mysteries, they were embellished for a purpose.
Well, back in that day, there wasn't much of a middle class, was there? Was it more blue collar or aristocracy?
There were certainly a lot more class orientation. However, I'll say one thing I noticed when I first went to England, which I think was 1982 or 6, that I liked, is that you could be a driver of a taxi in London and be quite respected and live reasonably well, where that was not the case when I went to New York. And who you met and what you thought of people that were kept, or Washington, D.C., where I lived in 1982. So I would consider that there is a bigger middle class now by a long shot and a bigger elite class. But it's just a different social setting, generally speaking. And the thing that's different in the last 4 decades of England is it is considerably more populated by immigrants.
Mhm.
A lot more than was the case in 1940.
Yeah, that does kind of, but that's been my observation, although my husband's theory on that, he's an airline pilot, so he used to go to England, and his theory is that the reason that the British conquered as much of the world as they did is they were looking for something good to eat. And then they brought it back with them because English cooking tends to be fairly bland. I think you had the royal somehow lineage, then you had the aristocracy who were the hanger-oners to the royals, and I think you had the industrial, mercantile, whatever, and then you had the domestic and the more the true blue collar, and she covers a lot of that. Kathy, did you want to add anything before we move to the next slide?
No, that's it. I didn't really have anything more to add.
So one of the things that I read this really interesting, I thought it was fascinating article about her, but one of the things is she does stereotype to some extent the British, and it says, you know, in reality, not every British village has a kindly victor, a blowhard colonel, a brittle lawyer, or a twinkling doctor. Or a large number of murderers, like Cabot Cove, Maine, right? Jessica Fletcher, with all the murders. And also, she doesn't really talk about the pubs. And the pubs were a huge area of social life, but she doesn't talk about those much in her books. Every now and then, now she'll talk about tea houses, but she doesn't really go to the pubs. But she certainly talked a lot about what you expected the English countryside to look like, and the stereotyping of the classes, which we've talked about a lot. So here was a thing about Perrault, likely to be a foreigner. He said, doubtless he's been able to do what you consider the right school. Happily being a foreigner, I am free from these prejudices and can make investigations unhampered by them. So he didn't have to have the stiff British upper lip. He didn't have to follow all the social conventions. He could, I'm sorry. You know, he could get away with a whole lot more. Miss Marple also, you get this sense of the listening and this quiet person who's just taking it all. Not to say we don't have it in the United States, but truly what she brought to people was, this is how they expect England to be. The hats, right? Everybody wears hats. We get that from the royal family. All right, I want to wrap this up real quickly, and then we'll go look at the video. Yes.
Do we have a dead stop?
Do we have a hard stop? Yes.
Yeah, hard stop in 6 minutes.
Okay, well, then we may stay, and I'll tell people to go to Bird Box. Anyhow, there's a podcast all about Agatha, and it has discussions about and a ranking of her books. I tried to find one about the Crooked House to bring, and it's such a long list, and there's no index. So that would be my first complaint is, you know, really, some of us would like to have an index. I also learned that Malice Domestic is a fan convention that takes place outside of Maryland. You can still buy your tickets, and it is supposed to award traditional mysteries best typified by the works of Agatha Christie. And one of the really interesting pieces that Agatha Christie brought was there's not a lot of explicit sex, gore, or gratuitous violence. And what's interesting is you go, oh, well, she was prim and proper. Well, many of her books talk about affairs. They talk about people dying but you don't get the gruesome blood splatter, blah, blah, blah. You don't get that. So I've given the website here. You can just look it up, but if you would like to go to it, you may. The Agatha Christie Festival is in Torquay, England, which is where she lived her younger life, or lived there. Now I can't remember which one. And it's actually a way to help their economy. But they have a whole weekend all about her. If you're going to be in England in September, here's a potential opportunity to put something on your itinerary. And as Peggy mentioned, in Oxford Theatre, and then there were none, but I think I have the wrong name. It's the Tread Avon Players. So what I think she said it is.
Yeah.
And also, I just read in the paper that an author from the Northeast of Maryland, Judy Murray.
Northeast is a town.
Is it a town? Well, see, I'm learning my geography. Anyhow, she has been nominated for the Agatha Award for her book, A Chesapeake Bay Mystery. It's to be a trilogy. Yes, you can buy it on Kindle. Yes, I did. And I am about 10% of the way through the book. So far, it's a good read. Haven't quite figured it out, but it's how does somebody die and somebody else is in the house and they say they didn't do it. That's the gist as far as I have gotten. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us for the 3 books. Our numbers dwindle.